So Blue Marble, we started in Seattle and we were recruited to come here to Montana. James is an alum of the University of Montana, and he loves this region. And he was one of the critical reasons we decided to relocate to Missoula, Montana to open our first zero-waste biorefinery. So we manufacture sustainable chemicals, and these are chemicals that don't come from oil or petroleum. They come from renewable sources like plant material. And why is this important? It's important because we're focusing on the other oil problem. It's not just a matter of where our diesel, our jet fuel, or our gasoline comes from. Nearly every consumer good that is produced has petrochemicals in it or is used to manufacture it. So it's in our transportation infrastructure. It's in our iPhones. It's in our Blackberries. It's in our clothes, our textiles, things like polyesters are petrochemicals. It's in the pharmaceutical drugs that you take, like Ambien, to go to sleep. It's in cosmetics, a lot of chemicals in cosmetics. It's in plastics. And it's also in nearly every one of these products in a supermarket anywhere USA. And so these are the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. This is not a fuel problem, it's an everything else problem. So what we do is we take biomass that comes from a variety of sources, whether it be coffee grounds from the local barista shops, whether it be grain from our commercial partner Anheuser-Busch. Gene Bocas is here. Gene, please raise your hand back there. He's the North American head of utilities for Anheuser-Busch. And they're a great partner for us. We've been testing and using their grain to produce chemicals that replace petrochemicals. That has several effects. Number one, it keeps oil from coming out of the ground. Number two, it keeps out of regions of the world that don't like us very much. Number three, it keeps carbon out of the atmosphere. And number four, it replaces these things that are toxic in our everyday products. James, you want to add anything on the products?
Okay, so fundamentally when we bring biomass into the facility, whether it is, when it comes in, we do a pre-processing where we'll do an extraction, where you throw high pressure fluids and liquids through it. That allows us to extract things like carotenoids, which are colors, their vitamins, stuff like that. After that, that's kind of the high value stuff. After that, we take the waste and put that into our mixed fermentation tank. Our fermenters back there in the facility have about 60,000 different organisms in them. So it's not like a brewery where you have one strain of yeast and do that. We have an entire microbial ecology that does all of its work. So it's kind of like, you know, Kelly using these euphemisms, it's kind of like if a cow in a swamp had a baby, that's what's going on inside those tanks. So you know, you can't win them all. But so when we go through that process, we extract the high value stuff out first, and all the stuff we're doing extractions with is generally waste from other industries. You know, it would be bark from a pull and post operation for the timber industry for peeling. It could be algae it's produced by our partners, either BioNavitas or Algavolve, for cleaning water or cleaning air or doing that. We take this waste material, do the high value extractions, and then that goes into our fermenters. And our fermenters kind of do what I always joke about here. So everyone's like, can you build this pretty? I'm like, no. You know, I don't do pretty. What I do is I deconstruct things, and that's what our microbes do. They deconstruct all the biomass that we bring in and take that down to the base chemicals that we can then recombine and reorganize to the materials we need. As it goes through this whole process, we actually use every bit, you know, we use the whole animal as we call it, we use every bit that comes through. So if we're using wood products as an example for this, material would come in, we'd extract terpenes out of it, which then go to, you know, gum components or stuff like that. The waste wood gets then blended down to as small as 10 microns, which is really, really small, it's almost the size of a bacteria. That goes into a fermentation tank. The cellulose and hemicellulose and proteins and that are left over in that system, the bacteria break that down to a gas. We extract all the valuables out of the gas. It actually, the liquid phase produces all these different chemicals that we use for flavorings and fragrances. We extract all that out. And then what's called non-digestible fiber, we're working on all sorts of different solutions to take that material and either render it down with, say, the Montana Refining Corporation, or different groups to refine it down into stuff that can replace petrochemicals. We're working with our partners on thermochemistry to be able to take that material and turn it directly into jet fuel or diesel. We're working on all value adds because we know we have to start at the top of the value pyramid. And then so we kind of get this whole broad range of products that come out of this. It's not like the classical problem we have with, Generation 1 biofuels. They made ethanol, they made biodiesel. That was an absolute failure in industry because they made one product. So.
Excellent. Biomass comes in, good stuff comes out. These are some of the compounds we make. So something like organic acid would be like vinegar. That's acetic acid. Formic acid is the taste of ants if you've ever eaten an ant. Butyric acid comes from like stomach juices. Natural esters, that's something like juicy fruit gum. There's no such thing as a juicy fruit in nature. You can't go squish a juicy fruit and get the flavor. That is a processed petrochemical. You can get it natural today, but it's kind of fuzzy math. So we're focusing on these industries. So okay, what do these chemicals go into? These chemicals go into things that we put on our bodies and put into our bodies. We're focusing on the food flavoring space to replace the petroleum chemicals. We're focusing on cosmetics because it's a great industry to get into. This is our history. So we started out in Seattle, this is a year ago actually. We had a 1 ton per day pilot, and that's what launched really the commercialization and the potential of our company. It's been 5.5 years of R&D, and it's time to go to market. And that says a lot of good things for our collective futures, I think, when technologies, not just ours, but many like ours, get to market. Because finally you'll have a choice, brown or green. So this is our pictures of our facility. You'll see them as you walk through in the tour in a moment. This is Jameson sitting next to Sputnik. We call it Sputnik. It's the big guy sitting in there in the production floor. But what does the future of the bioeconomy look like? Beer. Who's holding a beer? Can you hold that beer for a second? Okay. It makes sense. The first industrial biotech product was beer, or wine. These guys know how to take things that happen at the nanometer and go to massive scale. So we're talking about commercialization. It makes perfect sense to focus on guys that have been doing this for 100 years. So Anheuser-Busch makes a lot of sense for us to partner with. This is a picture of one of the refineries. Gene, do you know which one this is? I just took it off the internet. That's Los Angeles. Excellent. So you're talking about the ability to scale and really start producing the volumes that can start replacing petrochemicals. When you're talking about volumes, there's massive amounts of volumes of oil is used to produce chemical fractions. So policy matters. For our policy people in the audience, Senator Baucus's, Tester and Riedberg staff, Mr. Mayor and commissioners, this is why policy matters. This is a graph of the number of breweries in the United States, and we're using this just as a metaphor. Here in 1930, anybody know what happened in 1930? Prohibition, that's right. Number of breweries went to 0. Well, that's not true. Legal breweries went to 0. And then you have this emergence, this jump. Once Prohibition ended, you had this jump in breweries. And then you had this consolidation phase where guys like Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors were beginning to buy up all the breweries. And a piece of policy was passed in 1980. And this single piece of policy unleashed the creative potential of the beer space. It was called the Cranston Act. And it allowed people to homebrew and start producing beer and sell beer. It made it legal to actually sell beer at small scale. And what did that do? It launched the microbrewery industry. So suddenly you had this niche, specialized space competing against a massive installed base, which shows 2 things. Number 1, small can compete against big if you're innovative. And number 2, small policy tweaks can make a big difference in our economy. This is the environmental impact. So again, what we're doing here is we're taking biomass that was bound for landfill and repurposing that biomass. It comes into our facility, we make these chemicals that replace petroleum. And so the fuzzy math on this process is 1 kilogram of our product, so 1 liter of our chemicals offsets about a full ton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So in 1 year in our facility, we'll offset 26,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. That's equivalent to about 62,000 barrels of oil. It's meager and it's small in the grand scheme of things, but it shows as you scale, we can get there. We can replace petroleum. We think the future is going to be one where the bioeconomy thrives, especially for the United States. Why is that? Number 1, we have massive amounts of biomass. And people joke that the United States is the Saudi Arabia of biomass. Vast forests, prairie lands, we're the breadbasket of the entire world, essentially. And so when you talk about being able to create products from that biomass, that agricultural residue, we can start exporting products and technology, not jobs and our wealth as Americans. So we think this can create hundreds of thousands of living wage, high-paying jobs for folks in the green collar space. So in a nutshell, our goal is no simpler than trying to replace petroleum. We're up against some of the biggest guys in the world. But again, starting small and focusing and being innovative, we can compete. James, any final questions?
I just have some final comments here. One of the things I'd like to say is I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, but I'd also like to thank all of our partners over the years that we've worked with for coming out. And old and new, we've worked with BioNavitas for a long time on developing technology. It's their photobioreactors you see in there, cleaning up our air, cleaning up our wastewater in there. I'd also like to thank AlgaEvolve, another algae company that we work with heavily. It's their fence in the back. I'd encourage you all to talk to them. They all have innovative solutions to different aspects of the problem. I'd like to thank Mike. He's actually here. He's from Aquaculture Tech, right? Up north in Columbia Falls, they're actually working with the Stoltz Lumber Mill, integrating the wood products industry and producing energy replacements and sequestering carbon and stuff like that. I'd also like to thank, probably most effectively here for me is Rivertop Renewables is here. They have a large presence. They're another major biorefining company that's working here in Montana. Their system's radically different than ours. There's more catalytic chemistry and stuff like that, but it's still, the bioeconomy is being built from the ground up in this region, and there's a significant presence here, and it's a hub we can work to build that. I'd also like to thank Julia Artemis from the Montana Wood Products Association, and I would thank Julie Keys from the NRC. She's not here right now, but they kind of have drugged me into the wood products industry. And really what I've learned is, number one, is the Montana wood products industry is world recognized as a way where you can deregulate and still do sustainable forests. And that the forest industry is mainly about conservation, it's not about clear cutting. It was one of the best eye-opening lessons I've had over the last year, is that Montana's forest industry is not a clear cut, let's pull the timber out of the woods. It's a sustainable thing. For every tree they cut down, they're planting multiple trees, they're harvesting sustainably, and it's an industry that has all the infrastructure as a bioeconomy we need. And right now it's going through a failing process because we have competition from Russia, we have competition from China, we have competition from Canada, and they're just flooding the market with cheap lumber. So while I'm usually against tariffs and the full free market person, there may be some grounds for at least protecting some U.S. industries and being able to do it so we can actually make sure we don't lose that infrastructure that we need for the next economy that's being built.
So we're going to go on tours. Anybody want to go on a tour?
Yes.
Anybody? Okay. James is going to be leading the tour. First of all, investors and investors in Blue Marble, will you raise your hand? Thank you. Without you guys, this couldn't have been possible. So I see my mom back there. Please raise your hand, Mom. Hey, that's my mother. All right. All right, folks. Please congregate around James if you want to go on the tour. If it's too big, we'll split into two groups. And that's it for our program. Enjoy the beer and all the food we have. Thank you.